You're walking across a lush, rolling English meadow. Maybe you're strolling past the iconic Big Ben, or perhaps you're sipping a warm cup of Earl Grey tea in a cosy, centuries-old pub. It's the absolute perfect picture of idyllic, historic Britain. But what if I told you that just a few feet beneath your shoes lies a sprawling, pitch-black labyrinth of unimaginable secrets? Britain is hiding a massive, chilling secret. The country is practically hollowed out beneath the surface, resembling a giant slab of Swiss cheese. We are talking about thousands of miles of subterranean tunnels, cavernous halls, and bizarre grottos hidden completely out of sight from the bustling modern streets above. But here is the catch, the one detail that literally keeps historians and archaeologists awake at night. We don't know who built most of them. We don't know when they were carved out. And most chillingly of all, we have absolutely no idea why. Were they chiseled by ancient cults performing dark subterranean rituals? Do they belong to the highly secretive Knights Templar? Were they built for smuggling, witchcraft, or something completely unimaginable that defies modern logic? Forget everything you thought you knew about British history. The real story isn't written in the dusty textbooks. It's carved out of the cold, damp bedrock underneath the soil. Get ready, because we are about to explore the most mind-bending underworld on Earth. From walls made of millions of shells to eccentric millionaires building endless mazes to nowhere, you won't be able to look away. But right before we grab our flashlights and descend into the shadows, let's take a quick second to pause. This underground world spans across centuries, and right now we are spanning across the globe. I want to know, where are you tuning in from today? What time is it right now in your part of the world? Drop your current location and time in the comments below. It's genuinely fascinating to see our community connecting from every corner of the earth to uncover a shared global mystery. All right, let's dive in. Imagine the year is 1835. We are in the coastal town of Margate in Kent, a sleepy, picturesque area of England. A local man named James Newlove decides he wants to dig a simple duck pond in his garden. It is an ordinary day, an ordinary task. He hands his young son, Joshua, a shovel, and they get to work moving the dirt. But then the ground suddenly gives way. The shovel strikes something that doesn't sound like dirt or rock. It sounds hollow. A dark, gaping hole opens up in the earth. Curious, and perhaps a little foolish, James ties a thick rope around young Joshua, hands him a flickering lantern, and lowers the boy down into the pitch-black void. When Joshua is finally pulled back up to the surface, his eyes are wide with sheer terror and absolute awe. He stammers out a story about a magical, glittering palace buried under the mud. James thinks the boy's imagination is running wild, but he widens the hole and climbs down himself. What James Newlove stepped into that afternoon remains, to this very day, one of the most baffling, unexplained, and visually stunning architectural mysteries on the face of the earth. He didn't find a cave, he didn't find an abandoned mine shaft. He found the Margate Shell Grotto. Let me paint the picture for you, because words barely do this place justice. You walk down a chalk stairway and enter a winding, serpentine, subterranean passageway. The air is cool, damp, and smells faintly of the deep ocean. As your eyes adjust to the dim light, you realize that the walls are not made of stone. They are not made of brick. Every single square inch of the walls and the arched ceilings is completely covered in seashells. We are not talking about a few scattered decorations. We are talking about exactly 4.6 million individual seashells, millions of cockles, whelks, mussels, oysters, limpets and scallops, all meticulously sorted, cleaned and embedded into the walls to create a massive, breathtaking mosaic. The passageway snakes its way underground for over 70 feet, leading you into a central rotunda and finally into a spectacular rectangular room featuring a massive altar. The entire complex covers over 2,000 square feet of underground space, and there is not a single blank spot on the wall. Every inch is covered in millions of shells. Now you might be thinking, okay, that sounds like a beautiful art project, but here is where the story shifts from beautiful to downright bizarre. First of all, look at the logistics. To build this underground marvel, someone had to secretly excavate thousands of tons of solid chalk bedrock and sneak it out of the area without anyone noticing. Then they had to harvest 4.6 million shells. Have you ever tried to clean a single fresh oyster or mussel shell? They are covered in organic matter. They stink. If you leave a pile of fresh shells out in the sun, the stench of rotting sea life will carry for miles. Whoever built this grotto had to process millions of these shells, wash them, sort them by size and color, haul them underground, and cement them to the ceiling. And yet there is absolutely zero historical record of this happening. Nothing. No land deeds mention it. No local town gossip was passed down through the generations. No maps show its existence before 1835. It is as if it materialized out of thin air. Who could pull off an engineering feat of this magnitude in total secrecy, and more importantly, why? Let's look at the patterns on the walls, because this is where the mystery deepens. The mosaics are not random, they are highly calculated, intricate, geometric designs. You will see massive, sweeping suns with enormous rays. You will see 8-pointed stars, crescent moons, and intricate trees of life. There are strange, swirling geometric panels that look like they belong in an ancient temple, not beneath a British farm. Some symbols look strikingly similar to ancient Indian or Egyptian motifs. There is a distinct lack of any Christian symbolism. No crosses, no biblical figures. Whoever built this was worshipping something entirely different. The theories surrounding the Margate Shell Grotto are wild, and the more you dig into them, the crazier they get. Let's break them down. Theory number 1, the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were a brilliant ancient seafaring civilization that thrived around 3,000 years ago in the Mediterranean. They were master navigators and worshipped a pantheon of nature and sea gods. Some historians argue that the geometric patterns in the grotto perfectly match ancient Phoenician artwork. Did an ancient fleet of Phoenician explorers land on the coast of ancient Britain, dig into the earth, and build a massive secret temple dedicated to their sea deities? The altar room faces perfectly east, aligning with the rising sun, a common trait in ancient pagan sun-worshipping cultures. Could this be a 3,000-year-old temple hiding right under our noses? Theory number 2, the Knights Templar. Ah, the Templars. You can't have a mysterious European underground structure without mentioning this fiercely secretive, highly wealthy order of warrior monks. When the Templars were hunted down and prosecuted in the year 1307, they took their vast wealth and their secret knowledge and vanished into the shadows. Many researchers point out that the 8-pointed stars heavily featured in the shell mosaics are a classic Templar symbol. Did fleeing Templars dig this subterranean sanctuary to secretly practice their esoteric rituals, safe from the prying eyes of the king and the Pope? The winding, serpentine entrance mimics the journey of a soul travelling into the underworld, a concept heavily studied by secret societies. Theory number 3. A highly elaborate smuggler's den. Britain's coastlines were notorious for smuggling operations in the 1700s. Criminal gangs would smuggle tea, tobacco and brandy from France to avoid heavy taxes. Some skeptics claim the grotto was just a fancy hideout for pirate kings. But let's use some common sense here. If you are a criminal trying to hide illicit goods from the law, do you really spend 10 years painstakingly arranging nearly 5 million tiny seashells into beautiful flowers and sunbursts on the ceiling? No. Smugglers dig quick, dirty holes. They don't build subterranean Sistine chapels. We can cross the smugglers off the list. Theory number 4, an eccentric Victorian folly. In the 1700s and 1800s, it was actually a weird trend for ultra-rich British aristocrats to build follies, extravagant, pointless buildings or caves on their massive estates just to show off their wealth. Some would even hire actors to dress up as hermits and live in their fake caves to entertain their party guests. Could the Margate Shell Grotto just be a rich man's playground? The problem with this theory is the land itself. The land above the grotto was never owned by an aristocrat. It was common agricultural land. Plus, a folly is meant to be shown off. You build it to brag to your rich friends. You don't build a masterpiece, seal it underground, hide it from the entire world, and leave no record of it. Theory number 5. Witchcraft and dark pagan rituals. The energy inside the grotto is undeniably strange. Visitors constantly report feeling heavy, strange vibrations when standing in the altar room. The shape of the tunnels from above resembles a female reproductive system, leading some alternative historians to suggest it was built by an ancient fertility cult. Was this a place where ancient witches gathered to channel the energy of the earth and the sea? Were blood sacrifices performed on that pristine, shell-covered altar? The sheer amount of effort put into the space implies extreme religious or cultic devotion. You don't glue millions of shells to a wall in the freezing damp dark unless you are driven by a powerful, perhaps fanatical, belief system. So, why don't we just ask modern science to solve the riddle? Why don't we just use radiocarbon dating to find out exactly how old the shells are? Well, science tried, and science failed spectacularly. When the grotto was opened to the public in the mid-1800s, there was no electricity. To let tourists see the beautiful mosaics, the owners installed massive Victorian gas lamps. For decades, these gas lamps burned brightly, pouring thick, black carbon soot all over the ancient shells. Fast forward to the modern era, when scientists finally arrived to take samples for carbon dating. They realized that the shells were completely contaminated. The carbon from the 19th century gas lamps had seeped deep into the porous material of the seashells. When they ran the tests, the results were completely chaotic and impossible to read. The very act of illuminating the mystery ended up destroying our only chance of solving it. Even the mortar, the cement holding the shells to the wall, is a mystery. Analysts have tested it, hoping to find clues. They found that it's a strange, unique mixture of Roman cement, ash, and other organic materials. But the recipe doesn't match any standard building practices from any specific era. It is completely unique to the grotto. Today, the Margate Shell Grotto sits quietly beneath a regular row of houses and a mundane gift shop. Think about how wild that is. You could be sleeping in your bedroom, watching television in your living room, while directly beneath your floorboards is a massive, silent temple built by unknown hands for an unknown god, using the remains of millions of sea creatures. Was it the ancient Phoenicians, the secret Templars, a dark cult of the occult? The Margate Shell Grotto refuses to give up its secrets. It stands as a chilling reminder that no matter how much we think we know about history, the earth beneath our feet is still holding on to impossible, terrifyingly beautiful mysteries. But if you think a cave made of shells is strange, you haven't seen anything yet. Our next location takes us from the beautiful and bizarre right into the dark, dangerous heart of secret societies. Keep your flashlights on because we are heading into the Caynton Caves, where the legends of the Knights Templar are very, very real. We are leaving the coast now, trading the scent of salt water for the smell of damp earth and ancient pine. We are heading inland to the dense, quiet woods of Shropshire, a place where legends of knights and dark magic feel very much alive. If you were walking through these woods on a normal afternoon, you would never notice anything out of the ordinary. You might see a badger's den, some overgrown roots, and maybe a literal rabbit hole hidden beneath a tangle of briars and fallen leaves. But this is not a fairy tale, and jumping down this rabbit hole won't take you to Wonderland. It will take you directly into the heart of one of the most secretive, powerful, and dangerous organizations in human history. Welcome to the Caynton Caves. To enter this subterranean world, you literally have to get down on your hands and knees and crawl through a tiny, muddy crevice in the earth. It is claustrophobic, it is terrifying. But after a few feet of dragging yourself through the dirt, the narrow tunnel suddenly violently expands. You stand up, brush the mud off your knees, shine your flashlight forward, and your jaw hits the floor. You are standing in a massive, sprawling underground sanctuary carved entirely out of solid, red sandstone. This is not a rough, jagged cave. This is a highly engineered architectural masterpiece hidden entirely underground. Everywhere you look, there are perfectly carved neo-Norman archways, beautifully rounded stone pillars, and intricately designed circular chambers. The craftsmanship is staggering. The stone pathways wind around each other in a dizzying labyrinth, leading to small, sunken alcoves and hidden niches carved directly into the rock walls. But who would build a massive, perfectly symmetrical stone temple at the bottom of a rabbit hole? The answer, according to local legend and eager historians, points to a name that strikes fear and awe into the hearts of researchers: the Knights Templar. Let's do a rapid-fire history check. The Knights Templar were the ultimate medieval superpower. They were a fiercely secretive Catholic military order, formed during the Crusades. They were the elite special forces of the medieval world, wearing iconic white mantles with a massive red cross. But they weren't just warriors, they were the first international bankers. They amassed unbelievable, legendary wealth. They held the secrets of the ancient world. They answered to no king, only to the Pope. And because they were so powerful, so rich and so secretive, they became a massive threat. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, which is exactly where our modern superstition of Friday the 13th comes from, the King of France ordered the sudden, brutal arrest of all Knights Templar. They were hunted down, tortured, burned at the stake, and their vast treasures were seized, or at least the treasure the king could find. History tells us the surviving Templars fled into the shadows, taking their untold wealth and their esoteric, highly classified secrets with them. And this brings us back to the damp, dark sandstone of Caynton Caves. Researchers believe that fleeing Templars, desperate to escape the brutal purge, travelled to the quiet woods of Shropshire. They carved this massive underground sanctuary to hide from the king's assassins, to protect their holy relics, and to continue practicing their secret underground rituals. The circular design of the chambers perfectly matches the architectural style the Templars brought back from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. The hidden alcoves in the walls are the exact size and shape to hold candles for secret initiation ceremonies. Can you imagine it? Fully armoured warrior monks hiding in the pitch-black earth, chanting in Latin by flickering candlelight, guarding a treasure that the entire world was trying to steal. But the story of Caynton Caves doesn't end in the Middle Ages. In fact, its dark energy has attracted a much more modern and terrifying crowd. Fast forward to the 21st century. The caves started to draw the attention of modern-day occultists, witches, and practitioners of black magic. Urban explorers began finding the caves completely littered with the remnants of dark rituals. We are talking about pentagrams carved into the ancient sandstone, bizarre effigies left in the alcoves, melted black wax pooled on the floors, and terrifying chanting heard echoing through the woods on Halloween night. The dark rituals became so intense and the vandalism so severe that in 2012 the owners of the land above were forced to completely seal the entrance to the Caynton Caves. They blocked the rabbit hole, trapping the dark history, the Templar ghosts, and the modern occult energy permanently underground. The caves are now locked in total darkness once again, a silent, forbidden sanctuary lying just beneath the boots of unsuspecting hikers. But if Caynton is an underground fortress, our next stop is an underground puzzle box. We are leaving the quiet woods of Shropshire and heading right into the middle of a bustling, modern town. Welcome to Royston, Hertfordshire. It is August in the year 1742. The town is busy. Wagons are rolling down Melbourne Street, vendors are shouting, and a local workman is tasked with digging a simple hole in the street to build a footing for a new bench at the local butter market. As he digs his shovel into the bustling street, he hits something hard. He clears away the dirt and finds a massive, solid millstone buried in the ground. When he manages to pry the heavy stone away, a deep, dark shaft is revealed, plunging straight down into the earth. Just like at Margate, the locals did what Victorians loved to do. They tied a rope around a small boy and lowered him into the abyss. When the boy returned to the surface, he reported a massive bell-shaped chamber filled halfway to the ceiling with loose dirt, debris, and, chillingly, human bones. The entire town was whipped into a frenzy. Was there treasure down there? A forgotten tomb? They quickly banded together and hauled out over 200 wagon loads of dirt and debris from the hole. When the chamber was finally completely cleared, they lowered lanterns down into the dark. What the flickering light revealed on the walls sent shivers down the spines of the townsfolk, and it continues to baffle historians almost 300 years later. The Royston cave is shaped exactly like a giant beehive carved out of the solid chalk bedrock. It is about 25 feet high and 17 feet across, but it is not the shape of the cave that is terrifying, it is the walls. The entire lower half of this massive underground beehive is completely covered in heavily raised, deeply intricate and terrifyingly chaotic carvings. This is not a neat, orderly mosaic like the Shell Grotto. This is a frantic, overlapping explosion of historical and religious iconography. If you look closely at the cold chalk walls, you will see a massive carving of St. Lawrence holding the metal gridiron he was roasted alive on. You will see St. Catherine of Alexandria alongside the spiked wheel used to torture her. There is a massive, dominating carving of St. Christopher carrying a baby Jesus. There are towering crucifixes, massive swords, and knights in full armor. At first glance, you might think, okay, this is just a secret Christian chapel. But, wait, remember the horizontal expansion of our mystery. Look closer. Mixed right in with these holy Christian saints are completely bizarre, deeply pagan symbols. There is a prominent carving of a Sheila na gig, an ancient, highly explicit pagan fertility symbol that has absolutely no place in a Christian sanctuary. There are large, disembodied hearts, strange horses, and figures that look distinctly like ancient Roman or Celtic gods. There are strange, unexplained holes drilled deep into the walls beneath the carvings, exactly where you would place candles to illuminate the terrifying faces in the dark. And then there is the most confusing feature of all, the hole in the roof. At the very top of this underground beehive is a shaft leading directly up to the street level. What was it for? Was it a ventilation shaft so people could breathe while they held secret meetings in the dark? Was it a way to drop secret messages down to spies hiding below? Or, as some darker theories suggest, was it used to lower food to prisoners? Or perhaps drop sacrificial offerings down into the abyss? The theories about who built Royston Cave are a massive, tangled web of conspiracies. Let's break down the major players. Once again, the Knights Templar take the center stage. Remember the massive swords and the armored figures carved into the chalk? Many historians point out that the specific style of the crosses on the walls are exactly the type used by the Templars. Royston was a major crossroad in the Middle Ages, intersecting two massive ancient Roman roads. It would be the perfect strategic meeting point for Templar knights travelling across the country. Were they using this secret underground beehive as a safe house? Since they were prosecuted for heresy, for allegedly mixing Christianity with dark pagan magic, the chaotic blend of Christian saints and pagan fertility symbols on the walls perfectly matches their accused crimes. Was Royston Cave the ultimate, undeniable proof of the Templars' heretical underground rituals? But the Templars aren't the only suspects. What about the Freemasons? The Freemasons are the world's most famous secret society, known for their obsession with architecture, geometry, and hidden symbols. Some Masonic historians have visited the cave and claim that the layout of the carvings represents a very early, highly secretive Masonic initiation map. The journey from the darkness of the cave floor up to the light of the shaft mirrors the Masonic journey toward enlightenment. Could this be one of the very first entirely underground Masonic lodges in history? Then there is the royal theory. King James I of England actually had a palace right next to the site of the cave in the 1600s. King James was a notoriously paranoid man. He was terrified of assassins, obsessed with witchcraft, and loved absolute secrecy. Did the King of England secretly order a massive hole to be dug under the street so he could sneak out of his palace, drink heavily, and engage in bizarre rituals with his closest, most secretive allies, entirely out of sight from his royal guards and the public? Did a paranoid king sit in the dark, surrounded by carvings of tortured saints plotting against his enemies? And what about the bones? When the cave was first discovered, remember, there were human bones mixed in the dirt. Who did they belong to? Unlucky workers who were buried alive to keep the cave a secret? Enemy spies tossed down the shaft? Or victims of dark, forgotten rituals? Unfortunately, the bones were discarded by the careless Victorian workmen before they could be analysed, leaving the ghosts of Royston Cave forever unidentified. Today you can actually step off the busy pavement of Melbourne Street, walk through a small door, and descend into Royston Cave yourself. You can stand in the cold damp, look at the frantic, overlapping carvings of swords and saints, and wonder who stood in that exact spot hundreds of years ago. The sheer density of the history down there is suffocating, whether it was heretical warrior monks, secretive Freemasons, or a paranoid king. The Royston Cave proves that the most intense, world-altering meetings in British history didn't happen in grand castles or bright palaces. They happened in the dirt, in the dark, surrounded by the screaming faces of carved stone saints. But if you think medieval warrior monks and Victorian shell artists are strange, we need to go back much, much further in time. We need to leave the towns and the woodlands and head to the rugged, violently beautiful edge of the ocean. Grab your gear, because we are heading to the extreme western tip of England, into the swirling, magical mists of Cornwall. We are about to crawl into the terrifying, claustrophobic stone tunnels of the Iron Age. We are about to enter the Fogous. We are leaving the grand, decorated halls of medieval knights and the elaborate, shell-covered walls of Victorian secret societies far behind us. We are pushing much, much further back in time. We are leaving the bustling towns and the quiet woodlands, heading to the extreme western tip of England. Grab your heavy coats and your hiking boots, because we are stepping into the wild, rugged, violently beautiful and deeply isolating landscape of Cornwall. Cornwall is a place where the veil between our modern world and ancient magic feels incredibly thin. It is a land of sheer cliffs dropping into crashing oceans, sweeping, desolate moors swept by Atlantic gales, and thick, disorienting sea mists that can roll in and swallow you whole in a matter of minutes. This land has always been fiercely independent, deeply Celtic, and saturated in myth. And hidden beneath the coarse grass and the heather of this ancient landscape lies a network of subterranean structures so utterly bizarre, so prehistoric, that they make the Templar caves look like modern construction. They are called Fogous. The word itself, fogu, pronounced fugu, comes from the ancient Celtic Cornish language, simply meaning cave. But let me be entirely clear, these are not natural caves formed by water and time. These are highly engineered, massive, dry stone underground passageways built during the British Iron Age, roughly between 500 BC and the time the Roman Empire invaded Britain. To understand the sheer magnitude of the mystery here, you have to picture what it takes to build one. The Iron Age tribes of Cornwall would dig massive trenches deep into the heavy, unforgiving earth. Then they would line the walls with massive, unhewn granite blocks. We are talking about stones weighing several tons each, moved entirely by human muscle, ropes, and wooden rollers. Once the walls were built, they would cap the trench with even larger monolithic stone slabs to create a ceiling, and finally bury the entire structure back under the dirt so that it completely disappeared into the landscape. When you enter a Fogou today, the physical experience is deeply unsettling. You have to crouch low, stepping down a steep, narrow ramp. The temperature immediately plummets, the air is intensely damp, heavy, and smells of wet stone and roots. The passageways are usually curved, which is a brilliant and terrifying architectural trick. Because of the curve, the moment you walk a few feet inside, the natural daylight from the entrance is instantly cut off. You are swallowed by an absolute suffocating darkness. There are about a dozen confirmed Fogous scattered exclusively across Cornwall. They don't exist anywhere else in Britain. And despite over a century of intense archaeological study, the official academic explanation for what these massive underground stone corridors were actually used for is frankly embarrassing. Let's look at the mainstream academic theories, expanding our horizontal view of this mystery, and see exactly why they completely fall apart under basic logic. Mainstream theory number 1. They were built as underground pantries for food storage. Archaeologists love to classify mysterious ancient things as storage. The idea is that Iron Age farmers built these massive subterranean tunnels to keep their grain, meat, and dairy cool throughout the year. But there is a glaring, fatal flaw in this theory: the Cornish climate. Cornwall is practically a rainforest of sea mist and rain. The water table is high. If you step inside a Fogou, the walls are literally weeping with moisture. Puddles form on the muddy floors. If you take a basket of freshly harvested barley or wheat and place it in a damp, dark, unventilated underground tunnel, it will not stay fresh. It will rot, mold, and turn into a toxic, fermented sludge within a matter of weeks. Iron Age farmers were not stupid. Their survival depended on protecting their harvests. They knew how to build raised, above-ground granaries with good airflow to keep their food dry. You do not spend thousands of hours moving multi-ton granite blocks to build a refrigerator that destroys your own food supply. We can completely cross the ancient pantry theory off the list. Mainstream theory number 2. They were hiding places. The refuge theory suggests that when rival tribes, or later the Roman legions, came marching across the moors to attack, the villagers would grab their children and their valuables, run underground, and hide in the Fogous until the danger passed. Again, apply some basic tactical logic to this scenario. A Fogou typically only has one main entrance. It is essentially a blind alley. If you are an invading marauder and you see an entire village run into a hole in the ground, what do? You don't risk your life crawling into the dark with a sword. You simply pile a massive heap of wet wood and brush at the entrance, set it on fire, and let the smoke billow down into the tunnel. A Fogou isn't a panic room, it is a claustrophobic death trap. If you hide in a Fogou, you are either going to be smoked out, suffocated, or starved into submission. It makes absolutely zero military sense. So if they weren't for rotting grain and they weren't for mass suicide, what in the world were they for? To find the answer, we have to stop thinking like modern academics and start thinking like ancient Celtic Druids. The Celtic people of the Iron Age did not separate the physical world from the spiritual world. To them, the earth was not just dirt and rock, it was a living, breathing entity. The Druids, who were the highly secretive spiritual leaders, judges, and healers of the Celtic tribes, believed fiercely in the other world, a magical, sometimes terrifying, parallel dimension inhabited by spirits, gods, and the ancestors. In ancient Celtic cosmology, caves and underground waterways were not just geographical features, they were literal, physical portals. They were the thin places where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead could be crossed. Many alternative historians and experts in esoteric traditions believe the Fogous were designed as initiation chambers for druidic priests or shamanic journeying. Think about the architecture. The curved walls, specifically designed to plunge you into absolute blackness, the intense, sensory-depriving silence, broken only by the rhythmic dripping of water. If a young initiate was forced to spend 3 days and 3 nights entirely alone in the pitch-black belly of a fogu, fasting and chanting, the sensory deprivation would induce massive, terrifying hallucinations. They would physically feel like they had died, descended into the underworld, faced the spirits of the earth, and emerged back into the light as a reborn, fully realized druid. This spiritual theory gains even more terrifying credibility when you look at the specific layout of some of these structures. Take the Carn Uni Fogu, for example. Carn Uni is a beautiful, sprawling Iron Age settlement, but its Fogu has a feature that completely shatters any practical explanation. Connected to the main stone tunnel is a massive, circular side chamber, roughly 15 feet across, with a collapsed roof. The acoustics inside this circular room are completely abnormal. If you stand in the center and hum at a low frequency, the sound vibrates violently off the unhewn granite walls, creating a resonant, trance-inducing echo that rattles right inside your chest cavity. Was this circular room an ancient subterranean concert hall for rhythmic, hypnotic chanting? Were the Druids using acoustic resonance to alter their brain waves and connect with the other world? Then there is the chilling feature known as the creep. Almost every fogu has a creep, a secondary, tiny, incredibly narrow side tunnel branching off from the main passageway. These creeps are so small that a fully grown adult has to slither on their stomach through the mud to get inside, and they usually lead absolutely nowhere. They just dead end into the earth. Why go through the agonizing labor of carving a tunnel through solid bedrock that is too small to walk in and leads to a dead end? Folklore provides a much darker answer than science. For thousands of years, long after the Iron Age tribes vanished, the local Cornish people absolutely refused to go anywhere near the Fogous. They believed these tunnels were fiercely guarded by malevolent earth spirits. In Cornish mythology, there are creatures called knockers or piskies. Forget the cute, glittering fairies of modern pop culture. These were dark, dangerous, elemental entities that lived deep underground. Legends warned that if you entered a fogu, especially on the Celtic festival of Samhain, the ancient predecessor to Halloween, the spirits would drag you down into the tiny, dead-end creep tunnels, and you would be trapped in the stone forever, disappearing from the surface world without a trace. Even today, visitors exploring the largest remaining fogou, the Halligie fogou, frequently report overwhelming feelings of dread, nausea, and an intense primal urge to flee. People claiming to be sensitive to electromagnetic fields state that the Fogous act like massive spiritual batteries holding thousands of years of heavy, stagnant energy in the wet rock. There are countless reports of flashlight batteries instantly dying the second someone crosses the threshold into the tunnel, only to work perfectly fine once they step back out into the sun. Are the Fogous the ultimate proof of ancient acoustic shamanism? Were they dark portals built by druids to communicate with the spirits of the dead? Or were they somehow meant to trap the dangerous entities that the ancient Celts believed stalked the heavy Cornish mists? We may never find a definitive answer because the builders left no written language behind. The granite stones remain utterly silent, holding on to their prehistoric secrets in the cold, damp, dark. But our journey through Britain's bizarre underground is far from over. We are about to snap out of the ancient, misty past and hurl ourselves violently into the loud, smog-choked industrial madness of the 19th century. We are trading the mystical druids for one of the most eccentric, bafflingly rich, and deeply paranoid men in British history. Pack up your gear and get ready for a radical change of scenery, because we are heading to the bustling city of Liverpool. We are about to enter the completely unhinged, seemingly pointless labyrinth of Joseph Williamson, the mole man of Edge Hill. We are snapping out of the ancient, misty past and hurling ourselves violently forward into the loud, smog-choked industrial madness of the 19th century. We are trading the magical, barefoot druids of Cornwall for the top hats, the soot, and the roaring factories of the Industrial Revolution. Pack your gear and prepare for a radical change of scenery, because we are heading to the booming, bustling port city of Liverpool. Here, beneath the pavement of a very ordinary-looking neighbourhood called Edge Hill, lies an architectural puzzle so colossal, so expensive, and so completely, utterly devoid of any logical purpose that it genuinely makes historians question the sanity of the man who built it. We are about to enter the completely unhinged, seemingly pointless labyrinth of Joseph Williamson, a man famously remembered by history as the Mole of Edge Hill. Let's set the stage. The year is the early 1800s. Joseph Williamson is a self-made man. He started as a lowly worker in a tobacco business, married his wealthy boss's daughter, and eventually took over the company. By the time he was in his 40s, he was astronomically rich. He was a multimillionaire by today's standards, but Williamson was not your average high society gentleman. He was fiercely eccentric, deeply secretive, and had a bizarre obsession that would consume the entire second half of his life. Williamson bought a large, desolate tract of land in Edge Hill, an area perched above the city of Liverpool. On the surface, he built houses, ordinary, somewhat strange-looking Victorian houses, but what he was doing on the surface was just a distraction. His real passion, his true life's work, was happening completely out of sight, directly beneath the floorboards. Starting around 1810, Williamson hired an army of workers and began to dig, and dig, and dig. For the next 30 years, until his death in 1840, he funded the construction of the most massive, baffling underground network in the history of Britain. When you hear the word tunnel, you probably picture a dark, narrow dirt tube. Throw that image completely out of the window. The Williamson tunnels are not dirt crawl spaces. They are colossal, cathedral-like vaults built out of millions upon millions of perfectly laid red bricks. The engineering scale is genuinely staggering. We are talking about massive brick arches spanning 20, 30, even 40 feet wide. There are cavernous subterranean halls that look like they belong in a Gothic castle, not buried under a residential street. The most famous section uncovered so far is known as the Banqueting Hall. It is over 60 feet long and 27 feet high. You could easily park several modern semi-trucks inside it. And that is just one room. The tunnels are multi-layered. They stack on top of each other in a dizzying three-dimensional grid, plunging as deep as 60 feet into the solid sandstone bedrock. But here is the detail that absolutely breaks the brains of modern architects and historians. The entire network makes absolutely zero sense. This is not a transit system. It is not a mine. It is an architectural madhouse. If you walk through the Williamson tunnels, you will find massive, beautifully constructed brick staircases that descend 40 feet into the darkness and just end abruptly at a solid, blank wall of bedrock. You will find enormous, sweeping archways that lead absolutely nowhere. There are tunnels that curve around and simply loop right back into themselves. There are massive, supporting pillars holding up nothing but dirt. It is a subterranean maze of dead ends, pointless chambers, and structural impossibilities. It is like an underground optical illusion, a physical manifestation of an M.C. Escher painting built out of millions of bricks. It completely defies all logic, geometry, and reason. So we come to the multi-million-dollar question. Why? Why would a vastly wealthy, successful businessman spend his entire fortune and 30 years of his life secretly building a colossal underground maze that serves absolutely no functional purpose? Williamson left no blueprints behind. He left no diaries explaining his master plan. He refused to explain himself to his neighbors, and he famously told his workers to shut up, take their wages, and just keep digging. Because of this total silence, the theories about his motives have exploded into a massive, horizontal web of Victorian speculation. Let's break down the madness. Theory number 1, the ultimate philanthropist. This is the most charitable, widely accepted mainstream theory. During the early 1800s, the brutal Napoleonic Wars had just ended. Thousands of British soldiers were returning home to Liverpool, only to find utter poverty, starvation, and a complete lack of jobs. The government offered no help. According to this theory, Williamson couldn't stand seeing these veterans starving in the streets, so he invented a completely pointless, never-ending construction project simply to give them an honourable wage. He didn't just want to hand out charity, he wanted to give them the dignity of hard work. The story goes that he would order a group of men to dig a massive trench on a Monday and then order another group to completely fill it back in on a Tuesday just to keep the payroll going. While this paints Williamson as a hero, it completely fails to explain the architectural precision. If you just want men to move dirt, you don't hire master masons to build mathematically perfect 20-foot Gothic arches out of millions of expensive red bricks. The sheer aesthetic quality of the tunnels implies there was a much bigger vision at play. Theory number 2, the Doomsday Prepper. This is where things get significantly darker. Joseph Williamson was associated with a highly fanatic, fringe religious sect known as the South Cottians, followers of a supposed prophetess named Joanna Southcott. This group fiercely believed that the apocalypse was imminent. They believed the world was going to be destroyed in a massive, fiery cataclysm. Was the eccentric millionaire secretly building a massive, bomb-proof subterranean city? Was this a 19th century fallout shelter designed to house Williamson, his friends, and his chosen followers while the rest of Liverpool burned on the surface? The sheer depth and the massive reinforced arches make these tunnels incredibly structurally sound. If the world was ending, the Edge Hill tunnels would be exactly where you would want to hide. Theory number 3. The Smuggler's Kingdom. Liverpool was one of the busiest, wealthiest port cities in the entire British Empire. Massive fortunes were made in tobacco, sugar, and cotton, but taxes and import duties were crippling. Williamson was a tobacco merchant. Did he use his vast fortune to construct a secret underground highway directly from the shipping docks all the way to his warehouses in Edge Hill? Could these colossal arches have been built to allow horse-drawn carts to move massive quantities of untaxed goods entirely out of sight of the customs officers? It sounds plausible, but again, the chaotic layout completely contradicts this. A smuggler needs a fast, direct route from point A to point B. A smuggler does not need staircases that dead-end into solid rock. Theory number 4, the ultimate recluse. Some historians believe the answer is purely psychological. Williamson was known to be a deeply unhappy man in his private life. His marriage was reportedly miserable. He hated the noise, the smell, and the crushing crowds of industrial Liverpool. He was a man who wanted absolute control. Up on the surface, he had to deal with the chaos of society, laws, and other people. But underground, he was a god. He could build whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, shaping the very earth to his bizarre whims. He would frequently wander the dark tunnels alone, dressed in a shabby brown coat, carrying a single lantern, inspecting his pointless arches. Was this entire subterranean city just a psychological retreat for a brilliant but deeply disturbed mind, a physical manifestation of his desire to escape the world above? When Joseph Williamson finally died in 1840, the digging instantly stopped. The army of workers packed up their shovels. The great mole of Edge Hill was dead, and he took the secret of the maze to his grave. But what happened next is almost as tragic as the mystery itself. The city of Liverpool was left with a massive, dangerous void directly beneath a rapidly expanding residential area. What did the pragmatic Victorians do with a subterranean architectural masterpiece? They treated it like a giant municipal trash can. For the next 150 years, the locals used the shafts to dump their garbage. Hundreds of thousands of tons of ash, rubble, human waste, and household trash were poured down into the magnificent arches. Entire sections of the Labyrinth were completely choked with refuse, buried, and utterly forgotten. By the time the 20th century rolled around, the Williamson tunnels were just an urban legend. People thought the stories of the giant brick cathedrals underground were just a myth, that is, until the late 1990s. A small, fiercely dedicated group of locals formed the Friends of Williamson's Tunnels. They realized the legends were real, and they decided they were going to find the maze. They gained access to a basement, found a small brick arch peeking out from the dirt, and they started digging. They couldn't use heavy machinery because of the houses above, so they did it entirely by hand. Using simple plastic buckets and small spades, These volunteers have spent the last 2 decades painstakingly hauling out over 200 years' worth of compacted Victorian garbage. It is an archaeological dig through the trash of the 19th century. As they clear the tunnels, bucket by bucket, they are pulling out thousands of artifacts: Victorian chamber pots, antique inkwells, animal skulls, discarded military helmets, and thousands of creepy, broken porcelain doll heads. And the most terrifying part? They still have absolutely no idea how far the maze goes. Every time they clear a massive hall, they find 3 more bricked-up doorways leading deeper into the earth. Every time they unblock a staircase, it leads to another level they didn't know existed. The Williamson tunnels remain an active, ongoing mystery. Right now, as you are watching this, volunteers in hard hats are deep beneath the streets of Liverpool, hauling up buckets of dirt, slowly uncovering the mind-bending madness of a 19th century millionaire who tried to build a secret world. We have explored the beautiful, the ancient, and the absolutely absurd. But now we need to turn our attention to something deeply sinister. We are leaving the industrial brick arches of Liverpool and heading north, crossing the border into the wild, fiercely secretive lands of Scotland. We are looking for a hidden cove, not by the ocean, but buried under the streets of Edinburgh. Prepare yourself, because we are about to enter a place whispered to be the lair of witches, the playground of corrupt nobles, and a subterranean fortress carved by a man who made an impossible claim. Welcome to Gilmerton Cove. We have explored the beautiful, the ancient, and the absolutely absurd. But now we need to turn our attention to something deeply sinister. We are leaving the chaotic industrial brick arches of Liverpool and heading north, crossing the border into the wild, fiercely secretive lands of Scotland. We are looking for a hidden cove, not by the crashing ocean, but buried directly beneath the modern, bustling streets of Edinburgh. Prepare yourself, because we are about to enter a place whispered to be the lair of witches, the playground of corrupt nobles, and a subterranean fortress carved by a man who made an impossible claim. Welcome to Gilmerton Cove. Gilmerton is a quiet, unassuming suburb on the southern edge of Edinburgh. If you walk down its main street today, you will see a betting shop, a local bakery, and regular traffic. But underneath a totally ordinary, traditional stone building lies a trapdoor. If you open that trapdoor and descend a narrow flight of stone steps, the sounds of modern Scotland instantly vanish. You step into a sprawling subterranean complex that looks like it was ripped straight out of a dark fantasy novel. But what makes Gilmerton Cove so intensely unique, so completely different from the Williamson tunnels or the Margate Shell Grotto, is its architecture. This entire complex was not built with bricks. It was not assembled with stones. The entire cove, every room, every hallway, and every piece of furniture was carved entirely out of one single, massive, unbroken piece of solid sandstone bedrock. It is monolithic. Think about what that means. The long, winding passageways, the massive stone tables, the bench seating, a mysterious deep bowl, and even a fully functioning subterranean blacksmith's forge with a chimney carved straight up through the rock to the surface. It was all sculpted by meticulously chipping away the surrounding stone until only the furniture was left standing. It is essentially an underground sculpture on a massive architectural scale. So who managed to sculpt a fully furnished, multi-room subterranean apartment complex out of solid bedrock? If you ask the local historical records from the 18th century, they will give you a very simple and frankly completely unbelievable answer. The official story is that a local blacksmith named George Patterson single-handedly carved the entire cove by himself in the year 1724. The story goes that he wanted a secret place to live and to run a hidden underground tavern where he could sell cheap, untaxed alcohol to the locals. For a long time, people just accepted this story. But when modern structural engineers and archaeologists finally went down into Gilmerton Cove to examine the chisel marks and the sheer volume of missing stone, they completely destroyed the George Patterson myth. Experts calculated the sheer tonnage of solid sandstone that had to be excavated, hauled up a narrow shaft and secretly disposed of. They looked at the precision of the monolithic stone tables and the perfect angles of the archways. Their conclusion was unanimous. It is physically, mathematically, and biologically impossible for one man, working alone with 18th-century hand tools, to have carved Gilmerton Cove. It would have taken an entire team of highly skilled stonemasons, years, perhaps even decades, of relentless, back-breaking labour to hollow out this space. George Patterson didn't build Gilmerton Cove. He just found it, claimed it as his own, and used it to sell illegal booze. So if the blacksmith was lying, who actually funded and built this massive stone bunker? Because there are no written records of its true construction, the void has been filled with some of the darkest, most compelling historical theories in all of Scotland. Let's dive into the horizontal spread of these mysteries, because each theory is wilder than the last. Theory number 1, the witches of Edinburgh. Scotland has a deeply dark, incredibly violent history when it comes to the occult. In the 16th and 17th centuries, King James VI of Scotland was absolutely terrified of witchcraft. He believed dark magicians were actively trying to assassinate him, which sparked one of the most brutal, widespread witch hunts in European history. Thousands of people, mostly women, were tortured, tried, and burned at the stake. If you were a practitioner of the old pagan ways, an herbalist, or simply someone who wanted to hold secretive, anti-establishment meetings, doing so above ground was a literal death sentence. Did a powerful coven of witches hire sympathetic stonemasons to carve out the ultimate soundproof subterranean sanctuary? Let's look at the evidence in the stone. Right in the middle of one of the main chambers is a large, perfectly circular bowl carved directly into the bedrock floor. The official tavern story claims it was a punch bowl for serving alcohol, but occult historians argue it was actually a scrying pool. By filling the stone bowl with water and staring into it by the flickering light of a candle, witches believed they could see the future or communicate with spirits. The massive stone tables, seemingly too grand for a dirty underground pub, look suspiciously like ritual altars. Was Gilmerton Cove a secret temple for the dark arts, echoing with ancient incantations while the witch-finders roamed the streets above? Theory number 2, the elite sinner's den. Let's shift from black magic to pure, unadulterated human corruption. Edinburgh in the 1700s was a city of extreme contrasts. You had high society aristocrats, wealthy judges, and powerful politicians living pristine, deeply religious public lives. But behind closed doors, they desperately craved vice. They wanted to gamble vast fortunes, drink smuggled French wine, and engage in scandalous, illicit affairs without ruining their reputations. Some historians strongly believe Gilmerton Cove was a highly exclusive, secret VIP club for Scotland's wealthiest men. The so-called Blacksmith's Forge could have been a brilliant cover story to explain away the smoke coming from the underground chimney, while down below roaring fires kept the lords and ladies warm as they partied in the dark. The monolithic stone tables were perfect for high-stakes card games, and if the authorities ever raided the area, the multiple hidden exits carved into the rock allowed the aristocrats to vanish into the night before anyone could identify them. It was essentially an 18th century underground Las Vegas carved in stone. Theory number 3, the Bloody Covenanters. If we push the timeline back just a little bit further to the 1600s, we hit a period of intense, bloody religious civil war in Scotland. The Covenanters were a fierce, passionate movement of Scottish Presbyterians who absolutely refused to accept the king as the spiritual head of the church. Because of their defiance, they were hunted down by the royal army. It was known as the killing time. To survive, the Covenanters had to hold their religious services in absolute secrecy. They usually met out on the desolate, freezing moors, risking capture and execution. But what if a wealthy, sympathetic supporter decided to build them an indestructible underground church? The large central chamber in Gilmerton Cove, with its sweeping stone benches and acoustic resonance, is perfectly designed for a congregation to sit and listen to a sermon. The secret tunnels would allow for an immediate evacuation if the king's dragoons ever discovered the entrance. Was this dark, damp cave actually a beacon of rebellious faith where desperate people prayed for their lives in the pitch black? Theory number 4, the Knights Templar connection. You knew they were coming back. You cannot talk about mysterious carved stone in Scotland without the Templars entering the chat. And this time the geographical evidence is incredibly compelling. Gilmerton Cove is located just a few miles away from one of the most famous, enigmatic and heavily debated buildings on the entire planet, Royston Chapel. Royston Chapel is famous worldwide, partly thanks to the Da Vinci Code, for its baffling stone carvings, its undeniable Masonic and Templar symbolism, and the enduring legend that the Holy Grail, or the lost treasure of the Templars, is buried somewhere beneath it. Here is where the horizontal connection becomes chilling. Both Royston Chapel and Gilmerton Cove are carved from the exact same type of local sandstone. Both feature highly advanced, unexplained stonemasonry, and a massive network of unmapped, unexplored geological fault lines and ancient mining tunnels connects the land between the two sites. Did the same secretive master masons who built Royston Chapel also carve Gilmerton Cove? Was Gilmerton an initiation chamber, a secret vault, or even a hidden back door to a massive subterranean network stretching all the way to the chapel itself? Some researchers have practically begged for permission to use ground-penetrating radar to see if the dead-end tunnels in Gilmerton actually continue all the way to Royston, but so far the earth holds its secrets. Today, walking through Gilmerton Cove is a deeply disorienting experience. You run your hands over the cold, chisel-marked stone tables, and you can practically feel the ghosts of the past. Were they witches casting spells over a pool of black water? Were they wealthy lords gambling their fortunes away by lantern light? Were they desperate rebels hiding from the king's swords? Or was it just a very ambitious blacksmith who wanted a cool place to drink a beer? The stone refuses to speak. It remains one of Scotland's most perfectly preserved, utterly baffling underground enigmas. But as deep and mysterious as Gilmerton is, its sheer size pales in comparison to what we are about to explore next. We are leaving the monolithic stone furniture of Scotland and heading back into the heart of England. We are about to enter a subterranean city so massive, so incredibly vast, that entire generations of people lived, worked, and survived within its walls. We are talking about hundreds of interconnected caves, dark medieval tanning pits, and a 22-mile-long labyrinth where the terrifying echoes of ancient druid sacrifices still reportedly ring out in the dark. Take a deep breath of fresh air while you can. We are diving into the staggering, shadowy depths of Nottingham and Chislehurst. We are leaving the cold, monolithic stone furniture of Scotland and heading back down into the very heart of England. We are entering a place that isn't just a single cave, a solitary religious sanctuary, or a single millionaire's bizarre maze. We are talking about an entire, fully functioning, massive, subterranean city that exists directly beneath the tires of modern cars and the foundations of towering glass office buildings. Welcome to Nottingham. When you hear the name Nottingham, your brain probably instantly jumps to the legendary tales of Robin Hood, the sheriff, and the sun-dappled leaves of Sherwood Forest. But the real, terrifying and awe-inspiring history of this city isn't hidden in the branches of the forest. It is buried deep within the soft, dark sandstone upon which the entire modern metropolis was built. Nottingham is officially known as the City of Caves, and let me assure you, that is not an exaggeration. To date, archaeologists and urban explorers have mapped out over 800 individual caves carved beneath the city streets. 800, and those are just the ones they have managed to find so far. What makes the underground world of Nottingham so incredibly fascinating and so perfect for our horizontal journey through Britain's buried history is that these caves weren't built for just one specific, bizarre purpose. Over the last 1,000 years, this sprawling subterranean network has been constantly adapted, expanded, abandoned, and repurposed by entirely different generations of people facing entirely different, extreme challenges. It is a massive, multi-layered historical lasagna baked directly into the bedrock. Let's travel back in time and look at the first major layer of this underground city, the brutal, blood-soaked, and absolutely foul-smelling era of the medieval tanners. In the Middle Ages, producing leather was one of the most vital, yet absolutely horrific industries in the world. You needed leather for everything from armor and saddles to shoes and water skins. But to turn a raw, rotting animal hide into soft, usable leather, you needed two things: a constant, cool temperature and copious amounts of human urine and dog feces. The chemical process of tanning was so incredibly foul, so staggeringly putrid, that it was actually illegal to do it within the open city limits. The stench of the rotting flesh and the boiling ammonia would literally make people vomit in the cobblestone streets. So where did the poorest, most desperate workers of Nottingham go to do this repulsive work? They went underground. They carved massive vats, channels and pits directly into the sandstone beneath the city. If you walk through the cave network today, you can still see the perfectly preserved circular medieval tanning pits. Try to vividly imagine the waking nightmare of working down there in the year 1300. You are standing waist-deep in freezing, pitch-black water, mixed with animal fat, raw sewage, and toxic chemicals. There is absolutely no natural sunlight. The air is so incredibly thick with ammonia from the vats of urine that it violently burns your eyes and lungs with every single breath you take. The people who lived and worked in these subterranean tanneries lived extremely short, painful, and diseased lives. It was an absolute underground hellscape, operating in total silence and completely hidden from the wealthy lords and ladies walking in the fresh air just a few dozen feet above their heads. But as the centuries rolled on, the tanneries eventually closed down. The caves, however, were not abandoned. As we push forward in time, stepping out of the Middle Ages and into the roaring, smog-choked era of the Industrial Revolution, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the caves took on a new, equally tragic role. Nottingham had transformed into a massive, booming hub for the global lace and textile industry. Thousands upon thousands of desperate workers flooded into the city from the countryside looking for factory jobs. The population exploded overnight, and there was absolutely nowhere for these impoverished people to live. The city became dangerously, violently overcrowded. With no housing available on the surface, the poorest of the poor, entire families, sometimes 10 or 12 people at a time, were forced to move down into the abandoned, damp, freezing sandstone caves. These became officially known as the cave slums, and they were widely considered to feature the most horrific, dehumanizing living conditions in the entire British Empire. Imagine trying to raise a family, trying to cook a meal, sleep, and simply survive in a dark hole in the rock with absolutely no sanitation, no running water, and no access to clean air. Diseases like cholera, typhoid, and tuberculosis absolutely ravaged this underground population. The life expectancy for someone living in the cave slums was shockingly low. The conditions became such a massive, inescapable national scandal that in the mid-19th century, the British government actually had to step in and pass a specific piece of legislation, the Nottingham Enclosure Act, making it completely illegal to rent out a subterranean cave as a human dwelling. The authorities physically dragged the poorest citizens out of the dark, bricked up the archways, and sealed the entrances. For a brief period, the underground city sat silent. The massive network was used occasionally as cheap pub cellars or forgotten storage for local businesses. But then the 20th century arrived with a terrifying roar, and the sky above Britain began to literally fall. We have arrived at the outbreak of World War II. In 1940, the German Luftwaffe began their terrifying, relentless bombing campaigns over Britain, known as the Blitz. Nottingham, being a major industrial and manufacturing centre, was a massive, highly prioritised target. When the chilling wail of the air raid sirens echoed through the streets in the dead of night, the people of Nottingham didn't have to rely on flimsy, corrugated metal Anderson shelters buried in their backyards like the rest of the country. They had something vastly superior. They had an indestructible 800-room fortress already carved out of the solid earth beneath their feet. Virtually overnight, the dark, damp caves that had once been the ultimate symbol of extreme poverty and Victorian disease were suddenly transformed into the absolute safest place in the entire city. The local government sprang into action, quickly installing miles of electric lighting, reinforcing the weaker sandstone walls with heavy timber, and setting up thousands of bunk beds, emergency medical stations, and even fully functioning underground canteens. When the bombs rained down, tearing the surface city to shreds, blowing up factories and incinerating homes, up to 10,000 people at a time would pack into the subterranean network. Entire communities essentially picked up their lives and moved underground. The atmosphere down there was a bizarre, intensely emotional mix of sheer, paralyzing terror and incredible community spirit. People would play musical instruments, sing loud, defiant songs, and share their meager food rations while the earth violently shook and dust fell from the ceiling due to the massive explosions happening right above their heads. The Nottingham Caves undoubtedly saved thousands of lives. In a strange twist of historical fate, they transformed from a medieval nightmare into a 20th century sanctuary. Today, the story of Nottingham's underground city is far from over. It is still actively being written, and it still holds terrifying surprises. You would think that in our modern era, armed with ground-penetrating radar, satellite mapping, and advanced geology, we would know exactly where every single tunnel and pit is located. But you would be entirely, dangerously wrong, because the sandstone is so soft and because so many generations dug their own illegal, secret cellars over the last 1,000 years. There is no master map. Modern construction crews and city planners in Nottingham are constantly terrified of the ground beneath them. It is not an uncommon occurrence for a massive sinkhole to suddenly open up in the middle of a busy modern intersection, completely swallowing a parked car or a section of the pavement simply because the roof of a forgotten 300-year-old cave finally gave way to the pressure. Just a few years ago, a local pub was renovating their basement and a worker accidentally knocked down a false brick wall. Behind it, they found a completely preserved, untouched medieval cave system that had been sealed off and forgotten for centuries, complete with strange, unexplained religious carvings etched into the walls. Urban explorers, equipped with high-powered LED flashlights and cameras, are constantly finding small, hidden cracks in modern basements that lead into massive, echoing, unmapped chambers. They find old Victorian graffiti, rusted World War II gas masks, and the terrifyingly deep black pits of the medieval tanneries, all existing in absolute pitch-black silence directly beneath the chaotic noise of the modern city traffic. Nottingham is a stark, chilling reminder that human civilization is incredibly fragile, and sometimes the only way to survive the horrors of the surface world, whether it is extreme poverty, grueling industrial labor, or a rain of explosive bombs, is to dig down deep into the dark. But if Nottingham was a place of gritty industrial survival, our next destination is a place of sheer, unadulterated psychological terror. We are leaving the Midlands and heading south, right to the leafy, wealthy outer edges of London. We are about to enter a labyrinth so massive, so incredibly disorienting, that people have literally gotten lost inside its winding paths and never found their way out. A place where the echoes of ancient human sacrifice still allegedly bounce off the chalk walls, and where the darkness is so oppressive it can make you lose your mind. Grab a backup flashlight and check your batteries, because we are descending into the terrifying 22-mile-long black void of the Chislehurst Caves. If Nottingham was a grim story of industrial survival, our next destination is a place of sheer, unadulterated psychological terror. We are leaving the Midlands and heading south, right to the leafy, wealthy outer edges of London. We are about to enter a labyrinth so massive, so incredibly disorienting, that it completely defies the natural landscape above it. It is a place where people have literally wandered off the path, gotten lost inside its winding, identical corridors, and experienced profound psychological breakdowns. a place where the terrifying echoes of ancient human sacrifice still allegedly bounce off the chalk walls, and where the darkness is so oppressive it can make you lose your mind. Grab a backup flashlight, check your batteries, and stay incredibly close to me because we are descending into the terrifying 22-mile-long black void of the Chislehurst Caves. Let's get one thing straight right out of the gate. Calling this place a cave system is a massive historical understatement. When you hear cave, you think of natural water erosion, but Chislehurst is entirely man-made. It is a colossal, sprawling 22-mile network of intersecting tunnels carved deep into the soft chalk and flint of southeast London. When you first walk through the heavy wooden entrance doors, the temperature plummets. The air is dead, heavy, and completely still. As you push deeper into the network, the sheer scale of the geometry begins to play tricks on your brain. You are suddenly surrounded by a repeating, endless pattern of carved chalk pillars and identical archways stretching out into absolute infinity. If your flashlight were to die down here, you would be plunged into a sensory-depriving darkness so absolute that you wouldn't be able to see your own hand resting on your face. But who carved a 22-mile hole under London? And more importantly, what kind of dark secrets have those miles of tunnels witnessed over the centuries? Because of its sheer size, Chislehurst isn't just one mystery. It is a massive, horizontal timeline of bizarre human behavior, stretching back thousands of years. Let's start with the darkest and most terrifying theory: the ancient Druids and the blood altars. In the early 1900s, an archaeologist and antiquarian named William Nichols began extensively mapping the caves, building on theories from earlier historians who believed this massive underground network predated the Roman Empire. Nichols proposed that the deepest, oldest sections of the Chislehurst Labyrinth were not just mines but highly secretive subterranean temples built by the ancient Celtic Druids. Deep inside the maze there is a specific, chilling location known as the Druid Altar. It is a massive, monolithic block of chalk left standing in the center of a cavernous room. Carved directly into the surface of this block are strange, unexplained channels and grooves. According to the darkest legends, this was not a place of peaceful meditation, it was a site of brutal human sacrifice. The theory suggests that ancient Druids would march their sacrificial victims, perhaps prisoners of war, or even willing initiates, miles deep into the pitch-black earth. Surrounded by flickering torches and chanting priests, the victims would be laid upon the chalk block. The channels carved into the stone, according to this grim theory, were specifically designed to catch and drain the blood. Did the Druids believe that by spilling human blood deep inside the earth, they were feeding the underworld directly? While modern geologists try to argue that Chislehurst was simply a massive chalk and flint mine used to build London, the sheer complexity of the layout deeply challenges that mundane explanation. Miners dig straight, efficient lines to extract materials. They do not carve dizzying, intersecting circular mazes that lead nowhere, and they certainly do not carve massive altar blocks deep in the darkest corners of the system, but the Druids are only the beginning of the story. Let's fast forward a few centuries to the Roman invasion and then to the Saxon era. As the bloody wars for the British Isles raged on the surface, Chislehurst Caves transformed into a massive, terrifying game of hide-and-seek. Local legends claim that entire Saxon villages would vanish into the maze when ruthless Viking raiding parties sailed up the River Thames. You can easily imagine the terrifying scene, hundreds of terrified villagers clutching their children in the absolute dark, listening to the muffled, heavy footsteps of heavily armed Viking warriors stomping on the grass just a few feet above their heads. Later, in the 1700s, the vast, unmapped dark of Chislehurst became the ultimate playground for highly organized criminal smuggling rings. Just like the coastlines, London was a massive hub for illicit goods. Criminal gangs would navigate the 22 miles of pitch-black tunnels completely by memory, hiding thousands of pounds of untaxed French brandy, silk, and weapons in the darkest, most unreachable corners of the maze. To keep the locals away, the smugglers would actively spread terrifying rumors about ghosts, demons, and the ancient druid spirits haunting the tunnels. However, those ghost stories might not have been entirely fabricated. The psychological and paranormal history of Chislehurst Caves is so intense that it is legendary across Britain. In the mid-20th century, the management of the caves issued a terrifying, very public challenge. They offered a massive cash prize, a £5 reward, which was a huge sum of money back then, to anyone who could successfully spend a single night entirely alone deep inside the darkest section of the caves with only a small flashlight and a few matches. It sounds easy, right? Just sit in the dark for 8 hours. But the challenge became a complete psychological slaughterhouse. Dozens of brave, skeptical people, from tough police officers to university students, took the challenge. Almost every single one of them failed, sometimes within just a couple of hours. The sheer, crushing sensory deprivation of the 22-mile void literally broke their minds. Challengers reported absolute horrors. They claimed to hear massive, heavy footsteps running toward them in the dark. They felt freezing hands grab their shoulders. They heard the terrifying, distinct sound of a woman screaming, echoing off the chalk walls from miles away. One of the most famous legends of the caves is the White Lady. It is said she is the restless spirit of a woman who was brutally murdered by her jealous husband. He drowned her in a small subterranean pool hidden deep within the cave network. Challengers claimed they saw her glowing white figure hovering over the water, watching them from the darkness. Other challengers had to be dragged out of the caves by the management, completely hysterical, screaming about unseen forces violently throwing rocks at them from the shadows. The management eventually had to completely cancel the challenge because it was deemed far too dangerous for the public's mental health. But just when you think Chislehurst is nothing but a place of death, darkness, and psychological terror, history throws another massive curveball. Just like Nottingham, the outbreak of World War II completely redefined this underground world. When the bombs began to completely obliterate London, the government looked at the 22 miles of empty chalk tunnels and saw the ultimate saviour. In a matter of weeks, Chislehurst Caves was transformed into the largest underground city in the entire world. We are not talking about a few dozen people hiding in a basement. We are talking about 15,000 citizens living entirely underground. It was a massive subterranean metropolis. The government installed electric lighting and massive air filtration systems. Families claimed specific sections of the tunnels, setting up beds, rugs, and dressers right against the ancient chalk walls. The logistics were mind-blowing. This underground city had 3 fully functioning chapels for different religions. It had a massive underground hospital with surgical theatres. It had a subterranean barber shop, a canteen serving hot meals, and incredibly, it even had a fully functioning underground cinema where citizens could watch movies in the dark while the city of London burned to the ground above them. It cost exactly 1 penny a night to rent your spot in the cave. The caves were so safe and life was so vibrant down there that a baby girl was actually born deep inside the chalk labyrinth during a massive bombing raid. Her parents fittingly named her Kavina. Today, the World War II beds are gone. The underground cinema is silent. The caves have been handed back to the darkness and the ghosts. When you take a tour of Chislehurst today, the guides will purposely take you deep into the heart of the maze, tell you to stand completely still, and then they will turn off all the lights. In that sudden, violently absolute darkness, you can hear your own heart beating in your ears. You can imagine the ancient druids raising their daggers. You can imagine the terrified Saxons hiding from the Vikings. You can imagine 15,000 Londoners huddled together, praying for the morning. Chislehurst is a massive 22-mile tape recorder capturing the most extreme moments of human fear and survival. But our journey is about to take a hard, sharp turn. We have seen survival, we have seen religion. Now we are going to look at pure, unfiltered, highly organized human depravity. We are leaving the chaotic maze of Chislehurst and heading to a place that wasn't built for survival, but was explicitly, deliberately carved for sin. We are going to a place where the most powerful, wealthy, and famous men in the world gathered in secret to mock God, worship demons, and engage in unspeakable acts of debauchery. Prepare yourself for the darkest chapter of British history. We are heading to the Hellfire Caves. We have explored underground spaces built for survival, for ancient religion, and for eccentric obsession. But now we are taking a very dark, very sharp turn into something entirely different. We are leaving the desperate, huddled masses of Chislehurst Caves behind and stepping out into the crisp, wealthy air of the Buckinghamshire countryside. We are heading to the affluent village of West Wycombe. Prepare yourself, because the tunnels we are about to enter were not carved by desperate people looking for safety. They were not built by devout monks seeking a connection to the divine. They were explicitly, deliberately, and painstakingly carved for one single purpose: pure, unfiltered, highly organized human depravity. We are about to walk into the subterranean headquarters of the most notorious, scandalous, and powerful secret society in British history. Welcome to the Hellfire Caves. To truly understand the absolute madness of this place, you have to understand the era. It is the mid-18th century in England. On the surface, this is an era of extreme, rigid morality. High society is defined by powdered wigs, heavy silk dresses, polite tea parties, and strict religious observance. The aristocrats and politicians of London projected an image of perfect, untouchable virtue. But behind closed doors, the men who actually ran the British Empire were fiercely, desperately bored. They possessed absolute wealth and absolute power, and they believed that the laws of God and men simply did not apply to them. They wanted to engage in the darkest, most taboo vices imaginable, and they needed a place where no one could ever see them do it. Enter Sir Francis Dashwood. Dashwood was a wildly wealthy aristocrat, a member of Parliament, and a man who famously despised the rigid rules of the church and society. In his youth, he went on a grand tour of Europe, where he reportedly spent his time pulling elaborate, highly offensive pranks on religious leaders and immersing himself in occult philosophy. When he returned to England, he decided he wanted to create an exclusive club for his wealthy, powerful friends. He called it the Order of the Friars of St. Francis of Wycombe, but history remembers them by a much more terrifying name, the Hellfire Club. Dashwood needed a clubhouse, but a simple mansion in the country wouldn't do. He wanted something theatrical, something sinister. In the late 1740s, the local peasant farmers of West Wycombe were suffering from a string of failed harvests. They were starving. Dashwood, playing the role of the generous local lord, offered them a deal. He would pay them a daily wage to mine chalk from the massive hill on his estate, ostensibly to build a new toll road. But the road was just a cover story. Dashwood was standing over these starving farmers, holding a set of incredibly bizarre, highly specific architectural blueprints. He was directing them to carve a sprawling, intricate labyrinth straight into the bedrock of the hill. The entrance to the caves is your first clue that something deeply wrong is happening here. Dashwood had the entrance designed to look like the ruins of a massive Gothic church, complete with jagged flint walls and dark, empty archways. It was a deliberate, physical mockery of religion. You literally have to walk through a ruined church to descend into the underworld. Once you step inside, the chalk tunnels plunge over 300 feet straight down into the cold earth, winding their way through a massive quarter-mile labyrinth. The architecture is steeped in esoteric and pagan symbolism. The tunnels are highly sexualized in their layout, deliberately carved to mimic the human anatomy, a twisted joke meant to amuse the elite members as they descended into the dark. And who exactly were these members walking down these torch-lit chalk corridors? This is where the story stops being a scandalous rumor and becomes a terrifying historical conspiracy. The Hellfire Club wasn't just a group of rich local frat boys. These were the men running the country. The membership list reads like a who's who of 18th century global power. We are talking about the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Lord Mayor of London, the First Lord of the Admiralty, and numerous members of Parliament. John Stuart, the Earl of Bute, who actually served as the Prime Minister of Great Britain, was heavily rumoured to be involved. And then there is the American connection. One of the most frequent, highly documented guests at Sir Francis Dashwood's estate during the height of the Hellfire Club's activities was none other than founding father Benjamin Franklin. Franklin and Dashwood were incredibly close friends. They co-authored a revision of the Book of Common Prayer together. While historians fiercely debate exactly how deep Franklin got into the underground rituals, the fact remains that one of the architects of the United States of America was spending significant time hanging out at the estate of a man who ran a subterranean satanic sex cult. So, what actually happened down in the dark? The motto of the Hellfire Club was borrowed from the French writer Rabelais. Fais ce que tu voudras, which translates to do as you please. And down in the caves, they took that to the absolute, terrifying extreme. Members would arrive at the Wycombe estate under the cover of absolute darkness. They would strip off their respectable powdered wigs and their velvet waistcoats, and they would dress themselves in the robes of Catholic monks. Dashwood, the leader, would dress as the Pope. This was a deliberate, highly offensive mockery of the church. They would then descend deep into the caves. To reach the innermost sanctum, the members had to physically cross a subterranean underground river. Dashwood, leaning heavily into Greek mythology, named this body of water the River Styx, the mythical river that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. It is said that a low wooden boat waited on the muddy banks, operated by a servant instructed to stay entirely silent, ferrying the robed politicians across the black water. Once you cross the River Styx, you reach the absolute heart of the Labyrinth, the Inner Temple. The Inner Temple is a massive circular cavern located exactly 300 feet directly beneath the altar of the St. Lawrence Church, which sits on top of the hill. That was not a coincidence. Dashwood mathematically calculated the tunnel's trajectory so that while the innocent villagers were up on the surface, praying in the church and taking Holy Communion, the most powerful men in the country were directly beneath their feet, separated only by solid rock, conducting massive, blasphemous mock rituals. Inside the Inner Temple, the history books get very dark and very secretive. The rumours of what happened in that circular room scandalised the entire British Empire. It is widely believed that the monks would bring in dozens of high-class prostitutes from London, dressing the women in the habits of Catholic nuns. By the flickering light of hundreds of torches, fueled by vast quantities of smuggled French wine, the politicians would perform black masses, reading holy texts backward, offering mock prayers to Satan and ancient pagan deities like Bacchus and Venus, and culminating in massive, unhinged orgies on the chalk floors. There were whispers of animal sacrifice, dark magic, and political espionage. It was a place where state secrets were traded over goblets of wine in the pitch black, where blackmail was born, and where the men who wrote the laws broke every single one of them for sport. But even a secret society made of billionaires and prime ministers is not immune to absolute chaos. The sheer arrogance of the Hellfire Club eventually led to one of the most hilarious and terrifying historical pranks ever recorded, an event that single-handedly blew the lid off their secret world. It involves two high-ranking members, John Wilkes, a radical, fiercely intelligent politician, and the Earl of Sandwich, yes, the man who the sandwich is actually named after. The Earl of Sandwich was incredibly superstitious and absolutely terrified of the occult, even though he participated in the mock rituals. John Wilkes knew this, and he decided to push the Earl right to the edge of sanity. One night, the members were gathered deep in the Inner Temple. The Earl of Sandwich was standing at the front of the room, draped in his robes, loudly reciting a blasphemous prayer meant to summon the devil. Little did he know John Wilkes had secretly smuggled a large wooden chest down into the caves earlier that day. Inside that chest was a live, fully grown baboon. Wilkes had dressed the terrifying, screeching animal in a custom-made black cape, attached a set of fake demonic horns to its head, and tied it up inside the box. Right as the Earl of Sandwich reached the massive crescendo of his satanic prayer, begging the devil to appear, Wilkes silently reached over and pulled the latch on the chest. The baboon, completely terrified, disoriented by the torches, and highly aggressive, burst out of the box with a blood-curdling screech. It leaped across the room and violently attached itself directly to the face and shoulders of the Earl of Sandwich. The Earl, believing with absolute 100% certainty that he had just successfully summoned a real demon from hell, completely lost his mind. He collapsed to the chalk floor, screaming in absolute terror, begging God for forgiveness, and loudly repenting all of his sins right there in front of the entire club, while a monkey in a cape shrieked on his head. The sheer chaos of the baboon incident broke the spell of the club. Word of the prank leaked out to the public. Soon, London's newspapers were printing highly exaggerated, terrifying stories about the satanic rituals happening under the West Wycombe Hill. The public was outraged. The political fallout was massive. John Wilkes was eventually exiled. The Earl of Sandwich was publicly humiliated, and Sir Francis Dashwood was forced to quietly shut down the Order of the Friars of St. Francis. The torches were extinguished, the costumes were burned, the caves were abandoned to the damp and the dark. But a place that absorbs that much dark, manic energy doesn't just go quiet. Today, the Hellfire Caves are widely considered one of the most intensely haunted locations in the entire United Kingdom. And the ghosts here aren't ancient druids or nameless Victorian slum dwellers. They are specific, documented historical figures whose afterlives are tied directly to the chalk walls. The most famous paranormal resident is Paul Whitehead. Whitehead was the secretary and the steward of the Hellfire Club. He organized the orgies, managed the wine cellars, and kept the secrets. He loved the caves so much that when he died, he requested in his will that his literal physical heart be cut out of his chest, placed inside a silver urn, and permanently kept in the caves. For over a century, his heart actually sat down there in the dark. But in the 1800s, an Australian soldier visiting the caves allegedly stole the silver urn, taking the heart with him. Since that day, visitors and staff constantly report seeing the solid, physical apparition of a man in 18th century clothing desperately, frantically wandering the tunnels near the River Styx, endlessly searching the shadows for his missing heart. Then there is the chilling ghost of Suki, the White Lady of the Hellfire Caves. Suki was a young, beautiful local maid who worked at the local pub. She dreamed of marrying into the aristocracy. One night she received a secret letter, supposedly from a wealthy aristocrat, asking her to meet him deep in the caves so they could elope. Dressed in her best white wedding dress, she sneaked past the ruined church entrance and walked down into the pitch-black tunnels. But it was a cruel trap. A group of local farm boys had written the fake letter as a cruel joke. When she reached the meeting spot, they jumped out of the shadows to mock her. In the ensuing panic and chaos, a rock was thrown, striking Suki in the head. She collapsed on the chalk floor and died from her injuries. Today, paranormal investigators frequently capture massive temperature drops, terrifying EVPs of a woman weeping, and sightings of a glowing white figure drifting through the tunnels, forever waiting in the dark for a groom who never existed. The Hellfire Caves stand as a chilling monument to the arrogance of power. It proves that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't mythical creatures or ancient demons. Sometimes the monsters wear tailored silk coats, sit in the halls of Parliament, and carve their own private hells straight into the bedrock. We have explored the dark underbelly of the elite, but now we need to leave the velvet ropes and the political scandals behind. We are heading to the rugged, dangerous coastlines of southern England. We are going to look at a completely different kind of underground network, one built entirely for speed, stealth, and high-stakes crime. We are going to explore the sprawling, unmapped smuggler tunnels that literally connect the ocean directly to the basements of Britain's oldest pubs. Hold on to your wallets, because we are diving into a world of cutthroats, contraband, and midnight chases. We are leaving the velvet robes, the political scandals, and the demonic rituals of the wealthy elite far behind us. We are trading the aristocratic estates of Buckinghamshire for the jagged, violent, and wind-swept coastlines of southern England. Pull your collar up, because the wind is howling, the sea is crashing against the cliffs, and we are stepping into a world built entirely on stealth, speed, and high-stakes crime. We are about to explore the massive, unmapped, and highly dangerous network of smuggler tunnels that secretly connect the English Channel directly into the basements of Britain's oldest pubs, churches, and homes. To understand why thousands of miles of secret tunnels were carved into the coastal cliffs of Cornwall, Sussex, and Kent, you have to understand the sheer, crushing weight of the British tax system in the 18th and 19th centuries. The British government, completely bankrupt from endless foreign wars, started taxing absolutely everything. We are not just talking about minor tariffs. The taxes on everyday items like tea, salt, leather, soap, and candles were astronomical. The tax on French brandy and silk was so outrageously high that only the ultra-wealthy could legally afford them. For the poor, starving fishermen and farmers living on the coast, smuggling wasn't just a fun side hustle. It was an absolute matter of life and death. It was the only way to feed their families, and they turned it into an industrial-scale, highly organized and violently defended underground empire. The architecture of these tunnels is completely different from anything we have seen so far. There are no beautiful shell mosaics here. There are no mathematically perfect brick arches or monolithic stone tables. These tunnels are brutally functional. They are dark, narrow, muddy, claustrophobic holes hacked through solid chalk and dirt by desperate men working in the dead of night. Imagine the scene. It is a freezing, moonless night. A French ship drops anchor just off the coast. A fleet of small rowboats silently approaches the beach. Hundreds of men, known as tubmen, are waiting in the freezing surf. They strap heavy 100-pound wooden barrels of untaxed brandy to their backs and sprint across the sand. But they can't just walk into town. The coastal roads are heavily patrolled by the revenue men, the heavily armed customs officers and British dragoons who have orders to shoot smugglers on sight. So where do the tubmen go? They vanish into the cliffs. Right on the beach, hidden behind a tangle of seaweed or a fake rock wall, lies the entrance to a smuggler's tunnel. The men crawl into the dark, hauling the massive barrels on their hands and knees, navigating a dizzying, suffocating maze of dirt corridors that snake their way uphill, completely bypassing the military patrols walking on the grass above. And where do these tunnels lead? Directly into the cellar of the local pub. Let's look at one of the most terrifyingly famous examples in all of England. The Mermaid Inn, located in the picturesque ancient town of Rye. Today, it looks like a charming, historic hotel with beautiful timber beams and a roaring fireplace. But in the 1730s and 1740s, the Mermaid Inn was the absolute, undisputed headquarters of the Hawkhurst gang. The Hawkhurst gang was not a group of lovable rogues. They were a massive, ruthless, heavily armed criminal syndicate. They were the cartel of the 18th century. They controlled the smuggling trade across the entire southern coast, and they were utterly fearless. The Mermaid Inn was literally built over a massive network of secret subterranean tunnels. The gang was so powerful, and the local authorities were so terrified of them, that the smugglers didn't even bother hiding in the basement. Members of the Hawkhurst gang would sit openly in the main dining room of the Mermaid Inn, drinking smuggled French brandy, with their loaded flintlock pistols slammed right down on the wooden tables. If the local magistrate or a customs officer walked into the pub, they would simply look at the armed criminals, turn around, and walk right back out. But when the military did raid the town in massive numbers, the tunnels saved the gang's lives. The Mermaid Inn is riddled with secret architecture. There is a massive secret passageway hidden directly inside the chimney of the main fireplace. There are false walls in the bedrooms that lead to narrow stone staircases plunging straight down into the cellar. From the cellar, the tunnels branch out like a spiderweb, connecting the Mermaid Inn to other pubs, to the local church, and eventually all the way out to the sea. A smuggler could be having a drink in the pub, hear the soldiers busting down the front door, slip behind a wooden panel, and be halfway to the beach entirely underground before the soldiers even reach the bar. But the Mermaid Inn is just one piece of this massive horizontal mystery. Let's travel west to the rugged coast of Cornwall, to the tiny, beautiful fishing village of Polperro. Polperro was entirely economically dependent on the black market. The village is tightly packed into a steep ravine overlooking a small harbour, making it an absolute nightmare for the authorities to patrol, and an absolute paradise for smugglers. Underneath the village lies a chaotic, unmapped network of caves and carved tunnels. One of the most famous local legends involves a massive natural sea cave just outside the harbour, known as Willie Wilcox's Cave. Willie was a local smuggler who, according to the legend, was actively running from the revenue men. He ducked into the dark cave to hide, knowing there was a secret, narrow tunnel at the back that led straight up into the basement of his house. But Willie went into the dark and never came out. Some say a massive, sudden tide rushed into the cave and drowned him before he could reach the tunnel. Others say the tunnel collapsed, burying him alive in the dirt. For generations, the locals of Polperro swore that on stormy, moonless nights, if you stood above the cave, you could still hear the desperate, muffled sounds of Willie Wilcox frantically digging at the rock, trying to escape his subterranean tomb. The tunnels of Cornwall are soaked in these grim, violent stories of men who took massive risks in the dark and paid the ultimate price. Now let's swing all the way over to the east coast, to the town of Deal in Kent. Deal wasn't just a town that had a few smugglers. The town of Deal was, fundamentally, one giant smuggling machine. In the late 1700s, the mayor of Deal, the local magistrates, and almost every single resident were actively involved in hiding illegal goods. The architecture of the town itself was physically weaponized against the government. Almost every single house in the center of Deal was connected to its neighbor via a massive, shared underground tunnel system. It was a subterranean highway. A crew of smugglers could unload a massive shipment of untaxed tea and tobacco on the beach, haul it into the very first house on the street, and pass it from basement to basement to basement, completely, entirely underground. By the time the British Dragoons knocked on the first door to search the property, the contraband was already hidden 3 streets away, sitting safely in the crypt of a local church. The situation in Deal became so incredibly brazen, and the government was losing so much money, that in the year 1784, Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger decided he had finally had enough. He didn't just send a few police officers, he essentially declared martial law on the town. He sent an entire regiment of heavily armed soldiers to invade Deal. The soldiers literally went door to door with sledgehammers, smashing down the walls and ripping up the floorboards of the entire town. They uncovered the massive, staggering scale of the underground network. They found miles of interconnected cellars filled to the brim with smuggled goods. Knowing they could never arrest the whole town, the soldiers dragged all the illegal boats onto the beach, piled up the contraband, and set the entire massive pile on fire, creating a blaze so large it could be seen from France. They then forcibly filled in the tunnels. But even with the military cracking down, the underground coastal networks never truly vanished. They just got deeper, more dangerous, and more secretive. Exploring these old coastal pubs today is a fascinating, eerie experience. If you go to a pub like the Crown Inn or the famous Jamaica Inn, and you ask the landlord politely, they might take you down into the cellar. Behind the stacked kegs of modern beer, you will often find a heavy, rusted iron grate or a bricked-up archway. If you shine your flashlight through the cracks, you will see a dark, terrifyingly narrow dirt tunnel dropping away into the pitch-black void. You can smell the salt water mixed with the scent of damp earth. You can almost hear the heavy, frantic breathing of terrified men carrying massive loads of contraband, constantly listening for the sound of the tax collector's boots kicking down the cellar doors. It is a visceral, physical connection to a violent, desperate past. These tunnels were the veins of a shadow economy, pumping illegal lifeblood through the massive bedrock of Britain. They stand as a testament to human ingenuity and our absolute, primal refusal to be controlled by authority. When the laws on the surface became too suffocating, the people simply dug their way to freedom in the dark. But as the golden age of smuggling faded away, the need for underground spaces did not disappear. In fact, it evolved. It became larger, more industrial, and infinitely more secretive. We have spent our time exploring the mysteries of the deep past, ancient druids, medieval knights, Victorian eccentrics, and 18th century criminals. But the British underworld is not just a dusty museum of forgotten history. We are about to step out of the dirt tunnels of the smugglers and onto the cold, echoing concrete of the modern era. We are heading back into the heart of the cities to explore the terrifying, massive, subterranean secrets hidden right beneath the feet of modern commuters. From entire abandoned transit systems frozen in time to massive, heavily guarded bunkers built for the apocalypse, we are about to see what happens when the government itself decides to disappear into the earth. Let's head into the modern, urban underground. We are stepping out of the damp, dirt-packed smuggler tunnels of the 18th century and plunging directly into the cold, vibrating concrete of the modern metropolis. We are leaving the romanticized past behind because the underground mysteries of Britain did not stop when the Industrial Revolution ended. In fact, they became infinitely larger, incredibly industrial, and shrouded in the highest possible levels of modern government secrecy. Welcome back to London. But we are not looking at the glossy tourist map. We are looking at the shadow map. Every single day, up to 5 million people ride the London Underground, affectionately known as the Tube. They stare at their phones, listen to music, and complain about the delays, completely oblivious to the fact that they are hurtling through a massive subterranean Swiss cheese of forgotten history. Right next to the brightly lit, bustling commuter platforms lies a vast, silent, and entirely parallel universe, the ghost stations. There are over 40 abandoned, completely disused stations scattered across the London Underground network. Some were closed due to low passenger numbers, others because of complex rerouting. But they were not filled in with dirt. They were simply boarded up, locked, and abandoned to the pitch-black dark. If you are riding the Piccadilly line right between Green Park and Hyde Park Corner, you will rocket past a dark stretch of tunnel. If you press your face against the glass and look closely into the flashing darkness, you might just catch a split-second glimpse of dusty, arched platforms and vintage 1930s tilework rushing past your eyes. You are looking at Down Street Station. It was officially closed to the public in 1932, but its story didn't end there. When World War II erupted, the British government quietly took over this silent station. They bricked up the platform edges, leaving just a narrow gap so top-secret personnel could board passing trains entirely undetected. Down Street was suddenly transformed into a heavily fortified, deeply classified bunker. It became the subterranean nerve centre for the Railway Executive Committee, and, most incredibly, it served as a secret bomb-proof retreat for Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself. At the absolute height of the Blitz, while the surface of London was being violently torn apart by explosives, Churchill was sitting in a converted subterranean ticket hall, smoking cigars, drinking fine brandy, and secretly orchestrating the survival of the British Empire directly beneath the tyres of London's chaotic traffic. Today, Down Street sits in total, eerie silence, coated in decades of thick, black iron dust from the passing trains. Then, there is the legendary Aldwych Station. Tucked away on a forgotten branch line, Aldwych was officially closed in 1994, but its history is absolutely staggering. During the Blitz, it wasn't just used to shelter thousands of terrified Londoners, it was used to shelter history itself. The British Museum realized their priceless artifacts would be obliterated by German bombs, so they frantically packed up the Elgin marbles, ancient Egyptian mummies, and invaluable antiquities, loaded them onto a specialized train, and hid them deep within the dark, echoing tunnels of Aldwych. Walking through these ghost stations today is a completely surreal, mind-bending experience. The vintage posters from the 1930s and 40s are still glued to the decaying walls, advertising products that haven't existed for a century. The original wooden escalators sit rotting in the dark. You can hear the violent roaring rush of air and the muffled screech of modern trains rushing past just a few feet away on the active lines. But inside the ghost station, the air is dead, freezing and perfectly still. It is a massive, sprawling time capsule locked away behind heavily bolted iron doors. But the abandoned train stations are just the tip of the modern urban iceberg. If you want to talk about real, chilling, modern-day mysteries, we have to talk about the tunnels the government explicitly does not want you to know about. We are moving from the public tube to the highly classified, paranoia-fueled, apocalyptic, subterranean architecture of the Cold War. Beneath the historic, highly guarded streets of Whitehall, the absolute epicenter of the British government in London, lies a sprawling, heavily guarded network of tunnels known as Q Whitehall. When the global threat shifted from conventional German bombs dropping from airplanes to the terrifying city-vaporizing reality of Soviet nuclear missiles, the British government went into an absolute subterranean frenzy. They realized that a direct nuclear strike on London would instantly decapitate the entire leadership of the country. So they started digging. Deep below the Thames, far below the deepest train lines, they carved out a massive, highly classified underground city. Kew Whitehall is not an urban myth, it is an acknowledged, heavily redacted reality. It is a vast complex of interconnected concrete tunnels linking major government ministries, military headquarters, and intelligence agencies like MI5 and MI6, entirely underground. The terrifying idea was that in the event of a nuclear siren, the Prime Minister and top military brass could literally drop through secret hatches in their offices, sprint through miles of subterranean concrete corridors, and coordinate a global nuclear retaliation without ever having to step outside into the radioactive fallout. The sheer scale of the engineering is staggering. Take the Kingsway telephone exchange. This was a massive, incredibly secretive complex built over 100 feet below the busy streets of London. It was designed to maintain top-secret government communications during a nuclear war. It had its own massive power generators, enormous air filtration systems designed to chemically scrub out radioactive particles, and enough food and water to keep hundreds of essential staff alive for months in absolute, sealed isolation. For decades, thousands of Londoners walked directly over the Kingsway Exchange every single day, completely unaware that a massive, fully operational doomsday communication bunker was humming violently right beneath their shoes. The most chilling aspect of the modern government tunnel network is the absolute, impenetrable wall of silence surrounding it. Under the strict laws of the Official Secrets Act, people who worked in these subterranean complexes are legally bound to silence for life. They cannot tell their spouses where they work, they cannot write memoirs, they just vanish into the ground at the start of their shift and reappear at the end. We only know about facilities like Kingsway or Kew Whitehall because they have been partially declassified, sold, or abandoned. But what about the facilities that are highly active right now? Urban explorers and investigative journalists constantly uncover strange, unmarked ventilation shafts hidden in plain sight across the capital, disguised as fake brick houses, utility boxes, or park monuments in the middle of London. These massive shafts plunge hundreds of feet into the earth, constantly pumping fresh, heavily filtered air down into the dark. If the Cold War bunkers are now obsolete, what exactly is breathing down there today? Are there new, vastly deeper, technologically advanced tunnel networks linking the financial districts to military bases? Are there high-speed subterranean escape trains waiting on standby for the royal family and the Prime Minister? The government will never confirm it. They simply smile, issue a firm denial, and keep the heavy iron doors locked tight. We live on a surface world of glass, steel, and digital noise, pretending we know exactly what our cities are made of. But the modern concrete labyrinth proves that the ancient human urge to dig, to hide, and to keep massive, world-altering secrets in the dark is stronger today than it has ever been in human history. But as we wander through these dark, abandoned ghost stations and stare at the heavily bolted blast doors of government bunkers, we realize something deeply unsettling. Tunnels are not always safe havens. Sometimes when you step into the dark reaches back. We are about to cross the line from historical intrigue into pure, terrifying reality. We are heading into the final, darkest chapter of our journey. Prepare yourself, because we are about to look at the chilling, unexplained incidents of people who vanished into Britain's underground and the horrifying supernatural encounters that logic simply cannot explain. We have looked at the strategic, highly calculated concrete bunkers of the modern government. But now we must confront a much more chaotic, terrifying reality. We have spent this entire journey acting as observers, safely shining our flashlights into the past. But what happens when the safety lines snap? What happens when ordinary people accidentally stumble into these unmapped subterranean voids and the darkness actively refuses to let them leave? We are crossing the line from historical intrigue into pure survival horror. We are going to look at the chilling, unexplained incidents of people who vanished into Britain's underground and the horrifying supernatural encounters that modern logic simply cannot explain. Let's start right beneath the bustling streets of London, returning to the tube network, but this time we are not looking at abandoned stations. We are looking at the active tracks in the dead of night, long after the final passenger train has rolled away. When the London Underground shuts down at 1 a.m., the electricity to the massive rails is completely cut off. The stations plunge into an eerie, echoing silence. This is when the track walkers descend. These are the maintenance workers tasked with walking miles of pitch-black tunnels with heavy flashlights, inspecting the rails for cracks. And according to the terrifying, hushed testimonies of these veteran workers, the London Underground is unequivocally, violently haunted. You have to remember what the engineers had to dig through to build this transit system. London is an ancient city that has survived massive plagues, fires, and wars. When the Victorians dug the tunnels, they didn't just move dirt, they smashed their iron shovels directly through massive, forgotten medieval plague pits. They ripped right through ancient burial grounds, disturbing the remains of tens of thousands of bodies. Track walkers frequently report sudden, violently freezing drops in temperature that completely drain their heavy-duty flashlight batteries in seconds. They report the distinct, terrifying sound of heavy, unseen footsteps crunching on the gravel ballast right behind them in the dark. When they whip around with their lights, the tunnel is completely empty. Take Bank Station, a major hub in the financial district. For decades, night workers have reported seeing the terrifying apparition of the Black Nun. She is described as a deeply sorrowful figure dressed entirely in black, Victorian mourning clothes, wandering the lower platforms and the dark tunnels. Legend says she is the spirit of Sarah Whitehead, a woman who went completely insane after her brother was executed for forgery in the 1800s. She spent the rest of her life wandering the area looking for him, and apparently death did not stop her search. Workers have literally quit their high-paying jobs on the spot, dropping their tools and scrambling up the emergency stairs to the surface because they rounded a dark corner and saw her standing dead center on the tracks. But visual apparitions are nothing compared to the auditory horrors of the deep. At Bethnal Green Station, the supernatural activity is deeply, tragically rooted in documented history. During a massive World War II air raid, an anti-aircraft battery fired a loud volley of experimental rockets nearby. The terrified crowd rushing down the dark, wet steps into the station panicked, causing a horrific, crushing stampede. 173 people, mostly women and children, died on those dark stairs in a matter of minutes. Today, decades later, maintenance workers working the graveyard shift at Bethnal Green report an incredibly disturbing phenomenon. At around 2 a.m. in absolute silence, they will suddenly hear the faint sound of children crying. Then, the sound rapidly escalates into the terrifying, deafening roar of hundreds of people screaming in absolute panic, echoing violently off the tiled walls. It lasts for a few agonizing minutes and then instantly snaps back to total, dead silence. Paranormal investigators call this the stone tape theory, the idea that the physical bricks and the damp earth absorb the massive, traumatic psychic energy of that tragic night, and it acts like a broken tape recorder, endlessly playing the horror back into the empty tunnels. But what happens when the danger isn't supernatural? What happens when the massive, unmapped underground simply swallows you whole? We are leaving London and heading to the quiet, rolling green hills of Wiltshire in the west of England. Beneath the beautiful countryside lies a subterranean monster known as the Box Freestone Mine. This is not a simple cave. This is a sprawling, apocalyptic, dizzying maze of abandoned stone quarries spanning over 50 miles. The stone to build grand cities was ripped out of the earth here over centuries, leaving behind a completely chaotic, multi-layered, unsupported void. It is a legendary playground for extreme urban explorers, but it is also a massive, terrifying trap. Unlike a guided tour, there are no maps for the deepest sectors of Box Mine. The tunnels all look exactly the same, jagged, pale yellow stone pillars stretching out in a grid that breaks down into chaotic rubble. If you go in there, you are supposed to trail a physical string behind you, just like the myth of the Minotaur, but strings break. There are chilling, documented accounts of experienced explorers who took a wrong turn inside Box Mine and became instantly, hopelessly lost. You have to understand the physical reality of being lost underground. When your primary flashlight dies and your backup battery fails, you are plunged into absolute, sensory-depriving blackness. You cannot see your hand touching your nose. The silence is so heavy it rings in your ears. Without the sun, you completely lose your concept of time. 1 hour feels like 3 days. People lost in these mines report rapid, severe psychological breakdowns. The brain, completely starved of light and sound, begins to manufacture its own terrifying reality. They start seeing phantom lights dancing in the distance, luring them further off the path. They hear the voices of their family members calling their names from down a dark, collapsed corridor. It is an absolute, primal nightmare. Rescue teams have found missing explorers huddled in the fetal position, completely delirious, suffering from severe hypothermia, miles away from the entrance, totally convinced they had been trapped in the dark for weeks when it had only been 48 hours. And those are the lucky ones. Those are the ones who were found. Across Britain, from the sprawling, flooded slate mines of Wales to the deep, forgotten Victorian storm drains beneath Manchester, there are people who simply wander into the dark and never return. Teenagers looking for an adventure, urban explorers pushing their luck too far, or people who simply vanish near a known, unmapped sinkhole. The police search the surface, they drag the rivers. But the truth is, the underground network of Britain is so incredibly vast, so dangerous, and so completely unmapped that if you fall into the wrong shaft, or if you take a wrong turn in an abandoned 18th century smuggler's tunnel, the earth simply closes over you. You become another permanent resident of the dark, joining the ancient druids, the medieval tanners, and the lost Victorian souls. The underground is not a dead, empty space. It is a living, breathing entity. It holds the memories, the trauma, and the deepest, darkest secrets of human civilization. It is a massive, sprawling archive written in stone, chalk, and brick, stretching for thousands of miles beneath our feet. It offers absolute safety to those fleeing bombs and absolute terror to those who lose their way. Our massive journey through the dark is finally coming to an end. We are about to climb the stairs, push open the heavy iron doors, and step back out into the bright, blinding light of the modern surface world. We are heading into our conclusion to take one last look back at the abyss we just explored. We have finally made it back to the surface, take a deep breath of fresh air, and look at the sky, because after what we have just seen, the world above ground will never quite look the same again. We have travelled thousands of miles across Britain and thousands of years back in time, entirely in the dark. We started our journey staring at the beautiful, impossible geometry of millions of seashells in Margate. We crawled through the mud to uncover the hidden sanctuaries of the Knights Templar and the magical, sensory-depriving portals of the Iron Age Druids. We got completely lost inside the colossal, pointless brick labyrinth of an eccentric Victorian millionaire in Liverpool, and we sat in the cold, monolithic stone chairs of a secret Scottish cove. We witnessed the absolute extremes of human survival in the massive underground cities of Nottingham and Chislehurst. We saw the highest levels of political power descend into absolute depravity inside the Hellfire Caves, and we ran with ruthless smugglers through the dirt tunnels of the rugged southern coast. And finally, we confronted the chilling reality of our modern cities, where top-secret government bunkers hum silently beneath abandoned ghost stations, and unmapped stone mines wait patiently in the dark to swallow the careless. The history books tell us about the kings, the castles, and the wars fought in the bright daylight, but the truth is the real history of humanity is written in the shadows. The earth beneath our feet is completely hollow, scarred by the desperate, the wealthy, the devout, and the mad. So the next time you are walking down a quiet street or strolling across a peaceful green park, stop for a second and stomp your foot hard against the ground. Listen closely. If the sound echoes, if it sounds just a little bit hollow beneath your shoes, you have to ask yourself, who built the maze directly beneath you, and what exactly was left down there in the dark? If you survived this journey into the abyss with me, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's greatest mysteries. Let me know in the comments below, which of these underground locations would you actually dare to explore, and which one would you absolutely never step foot inside? I will see you all in the next video, as long as you stay out of the dark.